she struggled even with God. She struggled with profound doubt. What a creative life she led. So that direct encounter is so important. And we know sort of even in the basic physics of energy, you do, not now, not ever actually, never, go away. This energy is your humble and obedient servant, and it says, okay, I'll just wait until you're ready. 20 years later, your blood pressure's going up, your stomach's getting tighter, you're wondering what's going on. I'm your humble and obedient servant. I had a message to bring you, and you didn't listen. Are you ready to listen now? Are you ready to hear? That's the nature of energy. All the way down to cellular memory, right? We now know from heart transplants, we know so much about the nature that memory is held at the cellular level. So that's a good reminder. And we can think of this actually in the social body too, right? The cellular memory of the social body, the collective memory. And how that needs to be transformed. You will probably, some of you think it's quite negative to say there was a genocide of Native Americans in this culture, and it's never really been dealt with. You go to Australia, and in the 90s, the Supreme Court in Australia said, the very legal basis we used to colonize Australia was a fallacy, was inappropriate. We said, it was, terra nullius was the legal basis, meaning there was nothing on the land. And the Supreme Court said not only was there nothing on the land, there was a people on the land, and we didn't recognize them as people because they said they belonged to the land. And we said, well, if you own land, you're more human. If you buy up land, the Supreme Court. And then shortly after, the Mabo decision saying, we sent all these children and took them from their homes and educated them in other places. That was wrong. That's a very positive direction to go. Then in I think it was 2002, they created Sorry Day in Australia and it's wonderful now. School children saying to Aboriginals, doing class projects, communities doing, we're really sorry. We just didn't know in this part of our own evolution what we were doing. Now we're more conscious. And so healing hath begun at a societal level on a really interesting thing, by directly encountering the truth and dealing with it. So from the personal to the collective, we need that process, don't we? And then the sort of what I call the default response to dealing with stress begins early in life, doesn't it? And we know so much in psychology about how those patterns develop. And so think of maybe 7 years old, the person you thought was your best friend didn't invite you to the birthday party. Oh, God. Or your father didn't come just to that baseball game when you really hit the home and you weren't seen. Or the deeper disappointments when your parents, are separating or something like that. But how did you deal with, what was your first response, your default response? Were you the tantrum? Did you express it like that? Did you push the energy back? Because if you're thinking, think of all of this as energy. What are you doing with the energy? It's coming at you. There are still people who are doing that, when they're a lot older, aren't they? Or the people who say, it doesn't matter to me, denial. Or run upstairs and mope in your bedroom and maybe take out the candy bar and self-medicate with some candies. Who are still self-medicating, except it's not candy bars anymore. So looking at, this is why it was so wonderful to be with these Qigong people. By the end of the conference, I was like dancing. Because, they talk about that, finding the true center and how to work with energy so that you are experiencing the flow, and you're experiencing in your body where those blockages to the flow are. So that's a fundamental sense of how do we recognize that in ourselves and in society. And then the second phase is what I call then the handshake with. So if you've really developed this honesty and direct response, you get to a point where you say, everything that comes my way is my teacher. Everything, no matter what form it takes, it's my teacher. And I'm dedicating my life to my own growth and development and my conscious awareness. That's when it starts to get positive, right? Because anything that's thrown at you, you say, hello, darkness, my old friend, you've come to visit me again. There's no way out of the story, is there? Because you say, whatever it is, I'm in it. And I'm going to grow through it. I'm going to expand. You have that, buzzsaw encounter with stress, death of a close friend, whatever it is, a close relative, you lose your house burns down. How are you doing? I'm getting back in the flow. It's that sense of encountering the flow of energy. I'm getting back in the flow. That's an expression we use, isn't it? The deep flow of the whole universe. Right? That's what we think of at the quantum level of flow, flux, the flow. Native Americans talk about surfing the flow. Surfing the flow. So, I have this notion that you have the bog, and you have flat land, and then you have the higher elevation. And flat land is when you deliberately contain the energy. So you're always fine, actually. How are you doing? Fine. Fine. You can even hear in the frequencies of the voice, it's tamped down. I'm not going to let my dreams escape. I know where that leads to. That leads to disappointment, right? Tamp down your dreams, keep it flat. It's sort of all manageable. We've got a lot of flattening both at the personal level and the societal level, haven't we? Tamp down your dreams. Or, the swampland. How are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. You're always going around the swampy areas. You know where they are. And your life is a constant maneuvering around. Don't go there. That's going to lead to problems. And then higher elevation is when you see those mountains. The I Ching says, mountain arresting progress. It's a very good thing. It's a very good reading if you get that in the I Ching. Mountain arresting progress. Sounds like... And yet the mountain arresting your progress is say, get yourself ready for the climb. Get your supplies. Get what you need. Organize, and then start that climb to higher elevation. And when you meet that energy, you recognize it because it's got a certain vitality, doesn't it? It says, the challenge is great. The neuroscientist Jer Levy says, probably more than anything, what defines human progress is our ability to rise to challenge. And the challenges are so significant, aren't they? keeping in flatland? Or are you actually, and what do we do together to start the climb out of forms of consciousness that are not only tamped down, they are really inversions of what is needed for humanity. You know that 5%, the US has 5% of the world's population, right? A little less. Did you know that the US imprisons 25% of the prisoners held on planet Earth are imprisoned, incarcerated, locked up in America? Tamp it down, control it, get them off the streets. Don't try to heal them. Don't try to restore them. Don't try to recognize that that could easily be you. Punish. That's a stress response, isn't it? It's a stress response to, chaos on the streets or crime or whatever it is. But it's also a level of consciousness, isn't it? It's a worldview. It's a worldview that says, I can see no possibilities other than doing it in this very limited way. Are you with me on this? Are you seeing how this is in fact a social stress response that is denial, but it's also around worldview and consciousness. Let's just flick back to Rwanda. How much time do we have here? Are we tracking?
About 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. Let's flick back to Rwanda. And by the way, just in case some of you, because I can see it's early morning and I'm a little excessive, just to remind you of something, in rhetoric, your brains are conditioned to go from the specific to the general and from the general to the specific, to follow the point, right? Jacob Needleman says the Western mind is very pointed. It's looking for the point. And so some of you I can see are like, wow. Because I'm giving you some points, but I'm also Celtic. So I'm wandering. I take you to the edge of a point and then I run back over here. And why is that? Because the Celts and the Arabs are said to have a similar rhetorical style. It's called the zigzag. Because the point is not to get too pointed, to make sure that the emotional undercurrent is where you're also supporting. So the point is to take the journey together. So I just wanted to give you a little help for those of you like, wow, this guy is... Rwanda. So now we're back in Rwanda. You know what? The Rwandan government allowed me into a gacaca court. When Kagame came to power, there were 1 million people, many of the bodies still lying in the countryside, murdered. There were 200 to 400 women raped. There were hundreds of thousands of orphans. There were 2 million refugees on the border. There was no money. Every penny in the banks was taken by the exiting genocidaires. That's what he inherited. 16 years later, it's a hugely different story. And one of the things that he did was said, let's reconcile. Let's use restorative justice, not punitive justice. Here's genocide. You could very easily get into a punitive modality. And he said, no, the only way to change the story is to go back to our indigenous restorative justice modalities. It's called gacaca. It means on the grass. They allowed me into a gacaca course. I was one of the few Westerners who've been allowed into a whole day's process. It was so exciting that this is an indigenous approach that says, the purpose of justice is to find out the truth, not to play lawyers' games, but to, find out the truth and